I ducked into the motel to escape the rain. I left soaked and angry, and when I closed that thin paper guest book, I wasn't just closing a cover. I was closing the lid on half a life I thought I knew. The handwriting was hers. Her first name, clear and slanted the way she always writes when she's rushed. Beside it was a last name I didn't recognize, and the date, yesterday. My fingers went numb before my head did. For a moment, I could only stare at the blue ink bleeding into the cheap paper like a bruise. If you like stories that pull the rug out from under someone and leave all the pieces on the floor, hit subscribe. I tell these the way they actually happened. Not how people wish they had. I remember every small detail of that lobby like a scene from a film I couldn't look away from. The humming vending machine, the fluorescent light that buzzed like a mosquito caught in a jar, the receptionist pretending to read a manual while looking right through me. The air smelled of stale coffee and the kind of perfume that tries too hard to be memorable. I sat at the little laminate table, the guest book open in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt a cold, precise clarity wash over the panic. You have to understand, betrayal doesn't explode all at once. It arrives in quiet punctures. A name on paper is a small thing until you let your imagination stitch it to 1,000 other small things. The way she had told me she was working late. The missed calls I excused away. The lipstick on a collar I promised myself I wouldn't look for. The book was the first physical stitch to come undone, and the moment I saw her signature, something in me shifted from stunned to strategic. That I didn't shout. I didn't slam the book closed and storm back onto the soaked street. There are moments when rage is useful. There are better moments when patience becomes an instrument sharper than any outburst. So I swallowed. I took out my phone and snapped 3 photos of the page, close-ups. One that captured the whole line with the name, one that caught the date, and one silly, methodical shot of the motel's front desk plaque leaning in the background. I told myself I was being careful, not vicious. Evidence, I thought. Cold, unemotional, and irrefutable. People expect infidelity stories to lean on chases and shouting matches. They want the chair thrown, the glass shattered, the public humiliation. I know how those scenes play out. I've seen them in bar fights and in cheap reality TV, and they satisfy a kind of immediate hunger. But I had a mortgage, a job I liked, and a life that could be wrecked not just by rage, but by the kind of messy legal and financial fallout that follows a scandal. If I was going to respond, it would be in a way that ruined what needed to be ruined and left intact what needed to survive. That required discretion and a plan. So I did what anyone would do if they wanted to be thorough. I asked questions in the gentlest possible way. The receptionist was a young woman with a voice like she was trying to soundboard. I asked about the guest book, how often it was filled, if folks ever signed with nicknames. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she answered. She told me it gets signatures from people passing through, truckers, couples on weekends, contractors. I nodded, noted the cheap keycard rack behind her, and asked, harmlessly, if the motel ever dealt with complaints about same-day guests. She laughed, the sort of small, practiced laugh people use when they don't want to give anything up. I left a tip on the counter and walked back out into the rain, the book's page already copied into my phone. The rain felt smaller somehow, as if the storm was outside and something colder was growing inside me. I didn't call my wife. I didn't text. I didn't try to trap her in the moment. You can't win a chess game by grabbing the opponent's king while they're still setting up the board. You have to see the whole layout. What other pieces are in play, who can be trusted to be a witness, and what will be enough to make a lie impossible to keep telling. Standing under the awning with water running down the collar of my jacket, I thought about the things people hide. Receipts, hotel keys tucked into glove compartments. The way someone changes a voicemail greeting for a week and thinks no one will notice. The guest book was sloppy, public, and careless. Whoever had written that line had not planned for someone like me to care enough to look. That care, the kind that turns shock into a methodical reveal, is a dangerous thing when you direct it with purpose. So I started the quiet work that night. I backed up the photos to the cloud under a new folder, erased metadata where I needed to, took notes on my phone like a detective in a low-budget crime drama. I replayed conversations in my head, cataloged times and alibis, and wrote down every small inconsistency I could remember. I promised myself to act like a man who wouldn't be baited. No confrontations in the kitchen at midnight. No dramatic accusations in front of our friends. There would be no scene of broken plates I would later regret. I would build a case the way you'd build a house. Foundation first, then walls. Then a roof that wouldn't leak. As I walked home through the rain-slicked streets, passing neon signs and the late-night silhouettes of other people's messy lives, I felt something that surprised me, not relief, but the cold focus of someone who knows exactly what he has to do next. The guest book would not be the end of the story. It would be the beginning of a long sequence of carefully placed dominoes. I wasn't planning revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted truth, and I wanted to make sure that if things needed to be torn apart, it would be done cleanly, effectively, and without collateral damage to what I deserved to keep. That night, I slept badly, but I slept with a map in my head. The pages of that guest book would be a small, unassuming proof one day. Right now, it was a bruise under my skin, and bruises are only the start of the kinds of changes that hurt. And sometimes, if you manage them right, heal you stronger. I didn't sleep again that night. Instead, I let the city settle into its small noises while I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, and the 3 photos of that guest book spread out like evidence on a detective's corkboard. The first thing I needed wasn't a confrontation. It was a name I could put a face to, and a little more than the single careless last name scrawled beside my wife's signature. Whoever wrote that line had left a thread. I intended to pull it until the whole thing unraveled. The next morning, I went back to the motel. I told myself it was to ask one more question, but the truth is, I needed to see the place again, to watch people move through it in daylight. The lobby had a different rhythm in the morning. The coffee machine hissed for real this time, not like a tired mosquito. And the desk clerk was a different person, an older man with a face that had the habit of squinting at strangers. I slid the photo across the counter as if I was asking about a lost receipt. "This was here last night," I asked, casual, like a man trying to help. He glanced at the photo, then at me. "Yeah, couple checked in around 10, he said, towing into the kind of detail only someone who notices the world for patterns would know. Woman had blonde hair. Man drove a black truck. He hesitated, then added, "It was room 21-4. My throat went tight, but my voice stayed steady. Do you keep a lost and found? Maybe someone left a charger or a jacket. I can bring it to them." It was an old, polite trick. Make your interests sound small and harmless. He rummaged in a bottom drawer and produced a folded keycard wrapped in a rubber band. No questions asked. Holding that keycard felt ridiculous and small. It wasn't definitive proof of anything. It was incidental, a piece of someone else's life. But evidence doesn't have to scream. Sometimes it whispers its own truth if you listen long enough. I tucked the keycard into my pocket and left, making sure I looked like a man who'd simply performed a neighborly favor. Back in my car, I let myself breathe. Small wins stack. I started stitching the small information together. Room 214, check-in around 10, a black truck. That night I dug through the usual mundane places. My wife's online banking notifications, the family calendar, anything that could contradict or confirm, and found nothing obvious. But I did find a small hole in an alibi. An old receipt from a gas station 2 towns over with a timestamp that didn't match what she'd told me. I photographed that too. You learn to live off small things when the big truth is stubbornly hidden. I also took to watching my wife without it feeling like stalking. Just casual, careful observation. The way she texted from the couch. The way she'd put her phone face down when I walked by. There were micro habits that now read like sentences. She started leaving earlier in the mornings with lipstick that didn't match her usual shade and came home with excuses that faded faster than the daylight. The harder I looked, the more the little seams showed. And then I did something I almost didn't let myself do. I checked social media for that last name. I wasn't trying to be clever. I was being practical. The internet is blunt and loose-fingered. People throw identities around the way they toss change into a jar. It took a few false starts, a dozen profiles with similar names, a mismatched silhouette here and there, until I found him. Images of a man who fit the black truck. Contractor vibe, smiling in pictures with clients and trophies in a little local industry group. His surname matched the one in the book. Seeing his face felt like stepping from gray into color. I didn't react publicly. I didn't drive to his house or try to catch anyone. Instead, I cataloged what I had, saved the posts, and wrote down dates and times. Evidence, arranged and annotated, is less volatile than emotion. It survives the night. Emotion burns itself out. I kept telling myself the plan: observe, document, then expose, but only after I had a chain that couldn't be written off as coincidence. The motel ticket, the gas receipt, the social posts. None of them alone would collapse a story of years, but together they formed the outline of something real. And for the first time since I found that page, I felt less dizzy and more purposeful. The next move had to be precise. The game was changing from discovery to strategy, and I was finally ready to play it on my terms. By the third night after discovering that guest book, my body felt like it was running on static electricity. I went through the motions of normal life. Dinner at the table, small talk about her projects at work, the way she tucked her phone under a magazine when I walked into the room. On the surface, I nodded, asked questions, pretended interest. Underneath, I was dissecting every pause, every slip in her timing. Once you see the seams of a lie, you can't unsee them. I didn't want shouting matches. I wanted a blueprint. So I focused on time. Time is the one thing cheaters never manage perfectly. You can make excuses about a call, or a receipt, or a meeting, but when two timelines overlap badly, it leaves fingerprints. The next day, I called her office under the pretense of needing to drop off some papers. "She's not in yet," the receptionist said. I looked at my watch. It was nearly 10. According to her, she had been in since 8. I thanked the receptionist, hung up, and wrote down the exact minute in my notes. Another stitch coming loose. That evening, when she walked through the door, she was flushed, hair damp like she'd rushed through a shower. She kissed me lightly, the kind of distracted kiss you give a roommate, not a husband. "Busy day," she said, dropping her bag by the couch. I asked about her early morning meeting. She answered too fast, as if reciting a line she'd rehearsed. I didn't argue. I just smiled and logged it in the folder that now lived in my head like an unfinished puzzle. That night, I took another step. I logged into our shared cell phone account. Family plans can be cruel when you have secrets. Every text, every call, every late-night ping leaves a breadcrumb. I didn't scroll like a paranoid spouse looking for one bad number. I scrolled like an auditor. Patterns emerge faster that way. Sure enough, a string of late-night texts to an unlisted number appeared almost every other night. Short, spaced within minutes of each other, like someone trading inside jokes. I didn't open her phone, didn't hack anything. I didn't need to. The carrier records themselves were enough. I screenshotted, dated, filed. The next weekend gave me another opportunity. She claimed she had to go to a team retreat overnight. That sounded suspicious enough on its own, but what made it worse was the detail. She said it was mandatory. Mandatory company retreats almost always have proof: emails, group photos, hashtags clogging up Instagram feeds. This retreat had nothing, not a single trace from her coworkers. Instead, what I found was a charge on our shared bank account from a restaurant 2 towns over, the same town where the motel sat. The timestamp matched the night she said she was away networking. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at that charge, and feeling something strange, not heartbreak, not anger, but a cold rush of validation. It was working. Piece by piece, the facade was cracking. I wasn't reckless. I didn't confront her when she came back the next day with a bag that looked too neatly packed for a work trip. Instead, I welcomed her home, poured her a glass of wine, and listened to her fabricated stories about team exercises. I nodded in the right places, smiled when I should have, and mentally filed away every slip. That night, when she went to bed early, I stayed awake in the glow of the laptop. I searched the man's name again, deeper this time. I found not just his business profile, but an entire trail of local events, award banquets, charity galas, job sites. He loved publicity. He loved being photographed. And in several of those photos, I noticed something too convenient to be coincidence: a wristwatch. The exact same brand and style I'd once seen on our credit card bill under her account. It wasn't proof on its own, but in context it was damning. I saved the photos. I arranged them beside the call logs, the receipts, the motel guest book signatures. The story was writing itself in hard evidence, not emotion. Every item was a nail. Soon, I would have enough to build a coffin for their lies. But there was one thing missing. I needed to hear it. Not rumors, not receipts, not silent screenshots. Words. The kind that come from people who believe no one is listening. That's when the idea struck, to create an opportunity where they would hand me the truth themselves. And I already knew exactly how I'd do it by this point. My life had split into two versions, the one my wife thought I was living, and the one I was actually building behind the scenes. Outwardly, I was the same husband, steady, polite, unassuming. But in reality, every minute I spent with her was like sitting across from a poker opponent when I already knew their cards. I smiled, I laughed, I poured her wine. And I documented, quietly, mercilessly. The missing piece I craved was conversation, words that came directly from them, not from my imagination. I wanted their own voices to tie the knots. That's when I remembered something crucial: the motel. Those rooms had thin walls, a weakness I could use. I didn't need to break laws or plant hidden devices in private spaces. That would only blow up in my face. But public spaces, hallways, lobbies, parking lots, those were fair game. People whisper secrets where they think no one is paying attention. So I booked a room in that same motel. Not 214. I didn't want to be too obvious, but the one next door. 213. I checked in under a fake name, credit card in hand, as bland and forgettable as any tired traveler. I walked the halls, noting the acoustics, listening to how voices carried. The walls weren't paper thin, but close enough that careless laughter and fragments of conversation spilled through like leaking water. That first night, nothing happened. I heard muffled television, footsteps above me, doors opening and closing. I almost convinced myself it had been a wasted effort. But the second night, right around 10, I heard it. The door next to me opening, soft voices sliding inside, and then the unmistakable rhythm of people who thought they were alone. I didn't linger on the intimacy. I wasn't interested in lurid details. What I focused on were the words. Between whispers and laughter, I caught fragments. His nickname for her, her complaints about me, promises about getting away more often. Every word tightened the knot of proof that I didn't record anything inside the room. I didn't need to. Instead, I made detailed notes on the time, the duration, and the context of what I heard. Later, in the parking lot, I spotted them leaving. She was laughing too loudly, clutching his arm. He had the same black truck I'd been told about, parked under the buzzing neon sign. I took photos from a distance, not of them in any compromising position, just walking, just existing together where they thought no one would see. Evidence of presence, evidence of pattern. That night, my hands shook when I typed my notes. Not because I was scared, but because of the sheer precision of it all. They were writing the story for me, and I was simply transcribing. Piece by piece, their lies were building my case stronger than I could have done alone. Over the next week, I repeated the routine. I didn't stalk them. I anticipated them. People and affairs are predictable once you learn their rhythm. Thursday nights became late work nights for her. Saturday afternoons were errands that lasted too long. Each time, I was there in some form. In the motel, in the background, gathering what I needed. One Saturday, I pulled into the lot just in time to see them together, standing too close in broad daylight. She leaned against his truck, laughing at something he said, her body angled in the way people lean only when they feel safe with someone. I didn't storm in. I didn't throw accusations. I lifted my phone, angled carefully, and clicked twice. 2 photos. Enough to show context. Nothing more. I realized something as I drove away. I wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. I was shaping the outcome. I was deciding when the truth would come out and how hard it would hit. And that meant I needed to think bigger than photographs and guest books. Because if I was going to end this, I wasn't just going to end a marriage. I was going to end their comfort zone, their assumption that their secret was safe. And I already had the beginnings of a plan to make sure both of them felt the floor drop out from under them at the same time. And this time, it wouldn't be in some dim motel hallway. It would be in the spotlight they couldn't escape. That'd be why the time I had photos, timestamps, and even overheard fragments of their private conversations. The evidence folder on my laptop looked like something an investigator would compile. But I wasn't law enforcement, and I wasn't a gossip looking to spread rumors. I needed more than proof of the affair itself. I needed leverage, the kind that would collapse everything for both of them without me having to raise my voice once. That's when I started following the money. Not by tailing them, not by rifling through wallets, but through the one thing people in relationships often forget: shared finances. We had a joint account, and while most of it was filled with boring transactions, groceries, utilities, gas, a few stood out like blood on white cloth. Hotel charges, restaurant tabs in towns she never had a reason to visit, and late-night ATM withdrawals. They weren't large enough to trigger suspicion from the bank, but together they painted a story that I built a spreadsheet. Every entry was cross-referenced with a date she'd given me as an excuse. Company dinner, matched to a two-person steakhouse bill. Late project, matched to the gas station in the same town as the motel. I wasn't just proving infidelity anymore. I was proving intent, planning, and repetition. Courts love patterns. Judges love consistency. I wasn't gathering this for drama. I was gathering it for precision, but it wasn't just her. I dug deeper into him. The man with the black truck, the smug smile, and the wristwatch I'd recognized. His name wasn't hard to trace once I knew it. He ran a small contracting business. From the outside, it looked successful, shiny website, pictures of completed homes, smiling clients shaking hands. But when I pulled public records, I noticed something interesting. Several unpaid liens, late tax filings, and one ongoing investigation into questionable billing practices. That was the crack I needed. Because it meant he wasn't just cheating with my wife, he was sloppy with money, and that sloppiness could ruin him if exposed. And guess what? Some of those business expenses lined up perfectly with the weekends I'd spotted him at the motel. Dinners billed to the company card. Gas receipts marked as travel costs. It wasn't just a betrayal now. It was fraud that I printed copies of the relevant transactions and highlighted the overlaps. Each highlight was a nail in the coffin, and soon the folder was thick enough to feel heavy in my hands. When I closed it, I realized I was no longer acting like a betrayed husband. I was acting like a strategist preparing for a courtroom or a takedown. The beauty of it was that neither of them suspected a thing. At home, she still played the role, talking about future vacations and saving for upgrades, all while her lies sat like landmines in my drawer of evidence. With him, it was easier. He lived his life out loud, bragging online about big contracts and new deals. I smiled every time I saw him post, because I knew the numbers behind those boasts didn't add up point one night. As I sat at the kitchen table while she showered, I opened a blank document and typed out the first draft of a letter. Not a love letter, not an angry rant. A legal draft addressed to an attorney, outlining infidelity, financial misconduct, and misuse of funds. I didn't send it, not yet. But having it in writing made my plan feel tangible, and that's when the real idea hit me. It wasn't enough to simply prove they were together. I needed to set the stage so that when the truth surfaced, it wouldn't just collapse my marriage. It would collapse his reputation and career at the same time. That meant choosing the right moment, the right audience, and the right kind of evidence to reveal. I wasn't going to shout it in a kitchen fight. I was going to light the fuse in front of the people whose opinions they couldn't run from, because real revenge isn't about screaming, "I caught you." It's about letting them destroy themselves, while everyone important is watching. The next stage of my plan wasn't about catching them in the act anymore. I already had enough of that. The real strike would come from connecting dots they thought were invisible, and then letting those dots burn their lives down without me ever raising my hand. That I started by digging deeper into his finances. Most people don't realize how much information is floating around in public records, waiting for someone patient enough to piece it together. County clerk websites, business license filings, property records, all open to anyone with the time. I wasn't hacking. I was harvesting what he had left out in the open. And what I found made me realize how dangerous his sloppiness really was. There were discrepancies in his contracting business expenses that lined up almost perfectly with his little escapades with my wife. A client dinner that just happened to match the date and time of a two-person meal in that restaurant outside town. Travel expenses listed the same weekend I saw his truck parked at the motel. Every dollar he misfiled became a thread I could pull, and soon I had a web that looked less like a love affair and more like financial misconduct. Meanwhile, at home, my wife kept trying to play the part of the devoted partner. She'd smile, talk about her coworkers, even complain about office politics. I nodded along, pretending like I didn't already know the truth. But here's the thing. Once you've seen the other side of the curtain, every word sounds hollow. Every excuse feels rehearsed. And every plan she suggested, vacations, purchases, even small talk about saving money, became another brick in the wall of irony. She was building a future on sand, and I was the only one who knew it. But I wasn't just going to destroy them with paperwork. I needed the perfect stage. That's when I realized his arrogance would help me more than anything. He loved recognition. He loved showing off his business at industry mixers, local events, charity dinners. He practically begged for an audience. And I knew that audience would be the one to watch his downfall. So I made a plan to get closer. Not close enough to raise suspicion, but close enough to listen, to gather, to bait him into giving me even more. At the next regional building expo, I attended under the guise of looking for renovation contractors. I introduced myself, shook his hand, and let him do what arrogant men do best, brag. He talked about cutting corners to save costs, about creative accounting, even hinted at how he took care of clients off the books. I didn't need to push. I just nodded, let him keep talking, and made mental notes of every phrase. It was like watching someone build their own trap one careless sentence at a time. I didn't record anything illegally. We were in a public place, and I kept everything in written notes later. But the point was, he was reckless, and reckless people always leave a trail by the end of the evening. I had more than just proof of an affair. I had the beginnings of a case that tied his personal betrayal to professional misconduct. And in my mind, the two were inseparable. If he was willing to cheat in one area of his life, why wouldn't he cheat in another? That night, as I sat in my car outside the venue, folder on the passenger seat beside me, I realized something. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice, about taking two people who thought they could rewrite reality and showing them that reality always wins. The evidence wasn't just piling up. It was aligning. And soon, I wouldn't just expose them. I'd make sure the fallout landed exactly where it would hurt the most, because I wasn't planning on pulling them apart in private anymore. I was planning on pulling the rug out from under them in public. And when I did, there would be no way to pretend it hadn't happened. Why now? The folder of evidence I'd built was heavy enough to crush a conscience, if either of them had won. But the real power wasn't just in what I knew. It was in how and when I revealed it. And I had no intention of letting them choose the stage. That choice was mine. I kept watching their routines. She'd claim late nights at the office. He'd post about business trips. Their alibis were starting to sound like echoes of one another, hollow and predictable. That was when I realized the key. If I timed things right, I could expose them both in one strike. No messy drama at home. No private shouting match that could be spun into misunderstanding. A public unraveling, where every excuse would collapse under the weight of evidence. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. He was scheduled to speak at a local trade conference. One of those events where contractors pat each other on the back for innovation and community involvement. My wife even mentioned it at dinner, saying she'd be out with friends that same evening. The overlap was almost too perfect. I knew then that my chance was coming, but I didn't rush. I rehearsed the timing. I printed copies of the Guestbook photos, the bank receipts, the call logs. I printed the tax records I'd pulled, highlighting the expenses that overlapped with their trips. I even arranged the photos of them together in the motel parking lot. Innocent enough to avoid accusations of invasion, but damning enough when paired with the other evidence. Each page slid into a neat binder, tabbed and organized like a presentation. The next step was planting seeds. Quietly, I reached out to someone I knew who worked in local business compliance. Nothing dramatic, just a casual email about questionable accounting practices I'd noticed. I attached copies of the public documents. Nothing personal, just enough to point the spotlight in the right direction. Bureaucracy moves slow, but once the wheel starts turning, it doesn't stop. At home, she grew more careless. One night, she came back late, hair smelling faintly of cologne that wasn't mine. She poured herself a drink and sat across from me, talking about how stressful her job had been. I nodded, pretending like I hadn't already cross-referenced her lies with a hotel charge an hour earlier. She thought she was fooling me. The truth was, every word out of her mouth was strengthening my resolve. I needed one more thing before the strike: witnesses. Not to the affair itself, but to their own words. So I went back to the conference hall the day before his speech, walked the space, and tested how sound carried. I wanted to be sure that when the moment came, there'd be no way to deny it. And then came the night of the conference. The place was filled with suits, catered appetizers, the kind of small-town glitz that tries too hard. He stood on stage, chest puffed out, boasting about his commitment to honesty and integrity in the industry. I nearly laughed. The hypocrisy was so thick it could choke you. What he didn't know was that my binder wasn't just for me anymore. I'd already slipped copies into the right hands. People who mattered to him. Potential partners, regulators, even a few rivals. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to point fingers. All I had to do was sit back and watch as the walls closed in. And as he shook hands and smiled for photos, my phone buzzed. A text from her, claiming she was still out with friends. The timing couldn't have been scripted better. In that moment, I knew the dominoes were lined up. And I was ready to push the first one. That the strike wouldn't just reveal an affair. It would rip apart his career, her lies, and the carefully built fantasy they thought was untouchable. And when it happened, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. The truth itself would do the work for me. The night of the conference was when my patience finally started paying dividends. I wasn't there to cause a scene. I wasn't the kind of man to storm a stage or shout from the back of the room. No, I was there as a quiet witness, the architect of a collapse that would unfold without me ever raising my voice. That I stood near the back, drink in hand, as he strutted across the stage. He spoke about leadership, transparency, and integrity. Those words hit like a cruel joke, knowing what I had in my folder. I scanned the room. Some of the people I'd quietly slipped evidence to were already there, binder copies in their hands, eyes flicking between him and the damning papers. They didn't know me, didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed again. Another text from my wife. Don't wait up. Girls' night might go late. I stared at the screen for a moment, a smirk forming at the corner of my mouth. She had no idea she'd picked the very night her lies would unravel in real time. She thought she was free, that her excuses were safe. She didn't know the ground beneath her was already cracking. After the speech, he mingled with the crowd. I drifted closer, careful not to draw attention, and watched him bask in the spotlight. A couple of potential investors cornered him, binder copies in hand, and I caught the flicker in his expression when they started asking questions. His jaw tightened, his smile faltered. He tried to laugh it off, but you can always tell when a man feels the noose tighten. I didn't step in. I didn't need to. Instead, I slipped outside and waited in the parking lot. The black truck was parked near the entrance, polished and gleaming under the streetlights. And that's when I saw it. My wife, slipping out of a rideshare car, hair done up, looking like she was dressed for a date, not a girl's night. She scanned the lot, then made her way toward the side entrance, checking her phone as she walked. I stayed in the shadows, my heart pounding but my face calm. She wasn't here for the conference. She was here for him, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Inside, his professional mask was starting to crack under scrutiny. Outside, she was arriving to play the role of mistress in a story that was about to implode. I didn't confront her. That wasn't the plan. Instead, I lifted my phone, snapped a few clear shots of her arriving at the same event where he was supposed to be working, and tucked it away. Evidence stacked on evidence. Every detail tightened the noose. When she disappeared into the building, I waited a few minutes, then walked back inside. This time, I didn't watch the stage. I watched the sidelines. I saw her find him in the corner of the room, both of them trying to look casual as they spoke in hushed tones. But people were already watching him differently now. The whispers had started. The questions were circling. And there she was, sliding into frame like the final puzzle piece, proving exactly what I'd been building toward. I left without saying a word. There was no need to gloat, no need for theatrics. The moment was already perfect. They had delivered themselves into the trap. That night, back at home, she came in late, hair messy, claiming she'd been exhausted from dancing with friends. I listened, nodded, even offered to make her tea. Inside, though, I was already preparing the final stage. Because now it wasn't just my evidence anymore. Now there were witnesses. Now the questions were spreading. And when those questions reached the right ears, the collapse would be inevitable. The only thing left for me was to decide when to strike the final blow. The one that would bring their carefully built lies crashing down in front of everyone they cared about. This was the moment everything had been building toward. For weeks, I'd been patient, deliberate, and methodical. And now the dominoes were lined up so perfectly that all it would take was a nudge. They thought their affair was untouchable, hidden behind excuses and late-night lies. What they didn't realize was that their stage was already set, and they were about to perform their own downfall. The morning after the conference, the whispers had already started spreading. People in his industry talk fast, and when investors catch even a whiff of dishonesty, the chain reaction is brutal. By noon, I got word through a colleague that questions were being raised about his business practices. By evening, one of the local trade publications had hinted at unconfirmed concerns. He was slipping, and I hadn't even moved my queen yet. That night, my wife came home glowing, almost smug. She poured herself wine, sat on the couch, and talked about how great it was to see the girls. I smiled, nodded, and let her spin her fake story while the photos I'd taken of her at the conference sat on my phone, undeniable proof of her betrayal. Every sip of her wine was another reminder that she thought she was safe. The next day, I booked an appointment with my lawyer. I didn't storm in with anger. I walked in with a binder, guestbook photos, bank records, call logs, parking lot shots, screenshots of his social media bragging about client dinners that lined up with her work nights, and finally, the images of her slipping into that conference. The lawyer flipped through page after page, nodding slowly. "You've built a case," he said. "This isn't just hearsay. This is airtight." I knew I could have stopped there, filed for divorce, walked away, taken the quiet victory. But quiet wasn't enough. They hadn't been quiet with me. They'd played their games in the shadows, laughing behind my back. I wasn't just walking away. I wanted them to feel the floor collapse beneath them in one devastating moment. So I set the date. A family dinner. Her parents, her siblings, a couple of close friends. She thought it was my idea of reconnecting, an effort to show unity. I let her believe that. I helped her plan the meal, even bought the wine she liked best. All the while, my binder sat ready, copies printed and sealed in envelopes. When the night came, the table was filled with laughter and casual chatter. She played the role of the perfect wife, smiling, refilling glasses, telling stories about her busy job. I sat across from her, calm, steady, letting the room warm with comfort. Then, when dessert was served and everyone was relaxed, I cleared my throat. "I have something I need to share," I said, my voice steady. She looked at me, confused, maybe even a little wary. I slid the envelopes across the table, one for her parents, one for her siblings. They opened them, and silence fell. Pages of proof stared back, photos, receipts, records. Her smile evaporated. Her face drained of color. She stammered, tried to reach for excuses, but every word fell flat against the weight of the evidence. Her family's eyes burned into her, questions already forming, judgment heavy in the air. She looked at me like I had betrayed her, when the truth was she had betrayed us all. And then came the final twist of the knife. One last envelope, delivered to his office the very same evening. Inside, the same binder, but this time tailored to highlight his misuse of business funds. By the next morning, regulators would have it. Investors would see it. His career would be scorched earth before he even had time to mount a defense. I sat there at the dinner table, her hands trembling over the papers. I realized something powerful. I hadn't raised my voice once. I hadn't broken a single dish, hadn't screamed a single insult. I had simply let the truth do its work, and the truth was merciless. Their affair wasn't just exposed. It was destroyed, publicly, permanently, and in the exact way they feared most. And I wasn't finished yet. The dinner was only the beginning of their unraveling. The real aftermath was still to come. When the storm finally broke, my life looked nothing like it had just a few months earlier. The family dinner detonated her lies in front of the very people she thought she could lean on. Her parents were devastated, her siblings furious, her excuses collapsing under the weight of undeniable proof. There was no screaming match, no violent outburst, just silence heavy enough to crush the air in the room. The next morning, I packed my things with a calm I hadn't felt in years. Not the panic of a man losing his marriage, but the steadiness of someone reclaiming his life. My lawyer filed the papers, armed with evidence so thorough that negotiations leaned in my favor at every turn. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't vindictive. But I was precise. And that precision meant I walked away with my home, my share of our savings, and, most importantly, my piece.as for him. The fallout was worse than I could have scripted. The binder I delivered to his office made its way into the right hands fast. Within a week, whispers turned into formal inquiries. Business partners pulled back, investors walked away, and regulators circled like sharks. He tried to spin it, tried to bury it, but you can't bury paper trails. The same arrogance that made him sloppy became the reason his career imploded. And her? She reached out a few times. Long messages, half apologies wrapped in excuses, pleas for just one conversation. I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because there was nothing left to say. I had already listened to enough lies. My silence was the loudest answer I could give that it wasn't easy. The nights were long at first. The house felt too quiet, the bed too empty. But slowly, something shifted. That quiet began to feel less like absence and more like freedom. I started focusing on my own life again, working on projects I had put off, reconnecting with old friends, even planning a small business I'd always dreamed about but never pursued. The energy I used to spend second-guessing someone else's lies, I now invested in building my future. And here's the part one didn't expect. I was happy. Not overnight, not in a fairy tale way, but in a steady, honest way. I no longer woke up wondering what story I'd be fed that day. I no longer walked on eggshells around someone hiding secrets. I woke up with clarity, with purpose, with a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. So now I'll leave you with this question. Do you think I did the right thing? Was exposing them both, publicly, thoroughly, and without a single scream, the best choice? Or would you have handled it differently if you were in my shoes? If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true tales of betrayal, revenge, and justice served cold, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Drop a like to help this story reach others, and leave a comment below. What would you have done in my place?